Hello, I'm Ads and today I'll be running through how I painted my Sautekh Cryptothralls. I started by priming the murder buckets with lead belcher spray and leaving the arms off so I could get that shiny core. I then gave the mini a wash with Necron oil to add some definition to that metal. This goes everywhere, so remember to do the arms and the bucket halves too. Then I dry brushed the silver sections with Necron compound. You can edge highlight manually if you prefer, but dry brushing does the job for me. Lastly on the metal, I did a selective highlight with Stormhose Silver. Nothing too nuts, mostly looking at upper facing edges, sharp corners and points, and bringing some attention to the damage on the body. That's most of the mini done nice and quick. The only thing I'm avoiding for now are the claws. I'll give them some attention when they're attached to the mini. Next, the cables under the neck. I'll start with the rib cable, blocking it in with Corax White first. I use contrast to speed things up a little bit here. I give it an overall layer with Griff Charger Grey next, followed by Black Templar when that's dry. With how contrast paint dries, the Griff Charger underlay will give the highlights a blue tint ahead of time. If you don't have contrast paint though, basing this black and giving each ridge a thick edge highlight of Dark Reaper or similar blue-grey will do the same job, it just takes a little longer. The ridges then get a series of thinner edge highlights, starting first with Thunderhawk Blue, moving up to Fenrisian Grey, and a last point highlight of Ulthuan Grey. The smooth cables are a little more simple, starting with a base coat of Demon Net Hide before a couple washes of Necron oil. First all over the cable, and then another layer at each end just to darken the sides down. I then relayered the cable with Demon Net Hide again, watering this down a little more than usual and leaving some of the darkened base coat at each end. Then I highlighted with Waltfreen Grey and a last thinner highlight of Slaanesh Grey. To tie them to the Cryptek bosses, I decided on the same cold white face. To start that off, I based the whole face in Celestra Grey in a couple thin coats. I then relayered the face with Ulthuan Grey. White has something of a reputation of being difficult to paint, and a lot of that comes down to the smoothness of the white paints. They tend to be gritty and hard to get smooth. I found success in watering the paint down quite a way, putting on a bunch of thin layers. It builds in eventually and looks fine to me. With that dry, I bring in Griff Charger Grey contrast paint and selectively introduce shadows towards the lower parts and between the plates. Specifically, I look under the cheeks, the lower parts of the long chin, and around the temples. If the gradient is too hard a line separating them after it's dry, I'll bring back watered down Ulthuan Grey to smooth out the blend. If not, no need. I just go to white ink to edge highlight the plates. There's a couple areas in the Cryptothrall that you could paint as glowing, so to start those off I base coat them in a couple layers of Corax White. I'll also thin this down to a glaze and start to push a white gradient spanning from these areas. Then I took Moot Green, bringing it to a super thin glaze, about 1 to 6 with Larmian Medium. I then dilute this with water to be as close to an ink as I can get it, and start introducing this to the white areas and around them, trying to mimic casting light. Now, I'm not an expert at OSL or object source lighting if you're new to this, so hopefully I can express my simplistic manner of doing this alright. But as a general rule with OSL, I try and imagine a bubble around the light source. The outer edge of the bubble is the light's reach, and the closer to the source you get, the more intense the light, and as light gets more intense it gets whiter. To mimic that, I add multiple thin layers of green around the light source, covering less area when I add a new layer. And when that's dry, bringing in white ink to bring back a hot spot. Going back and forth like this helps me maintain the gradient as best as I can. Be sure to give some attention to the inside of the arms too. When those are attached to the Mini, those will be quite close to the light source, so you want to introduce some green to those too. Again, picture the bubble and imagine where the bubble would touch on the inside of the arms and paint accordingly. Now for that bucket. I'm going to paint this in the dark green armour that I've got littered around my army. So I start by pushing the two halves onto the Mini, then go at it with a coat or two of thin matte black. Build this in with a couple layers to keep the paint smooth. Next, a glaze of Caliban green towards the end of the bucket, leaving the middle black. A full edge highlight of Warpstone Glow next, taking care to not accidentally tag any of the finished areas with the brush tip. And a final point highlight of Moot Green to all the edges and sharp points to finish it off. The final detail before I base him are his claws. I want to take a bit more time on these and put a TMM or True Metallic Metal pattern to them. I covered the green version of this in my Overlord video, but I'm doing a more standard silver and black one here. I start by glazing Ironbreaker from just over halfway up on opposite edges of the blade, getting brighter towards the tip on one side and brighter towards the back on the other. I also swap this again on the back side of each blade. I then do the same with Nuln Oil, only towards the opposite side. Try and get the gradient to even out at around the centre of the blade here. Lastly, I bring in Stormhost Silver, firstly as a second glaze on the brighter sides to make them shinier, then as an edge highlight around the whole blade and down the centre line. And with the base sorted and the rim painted, the Cryptothrall is complete. A nice and quick paint job, and I've learned a bit more about OSL by trying a different method than I normally would. Looking forward to going back to my Overlord's Resurrection Orbs now. If you have any questions, or if I skipped over something too quickly, leave a comment below and I'll get back to you. Thanks again for watching, good luck with your own Cryptothralls, and I'll see you again soon.